One of the more interesting historical events of the last decade is the reaction that the American citizenry had to the 9/11 attacks. If you go back and look at the contemporary media discussions of the time, they literally could not understand why anybody would possibly want to attack the United States. I mean, all we do is go about our business. We don't bother anybody in the world. What kind of irrationality would be necessary to cause somebody to want to come and attack the United States? And that idea, which I don't blame people for having asked, got expressed with the now sort of cliched famous question, why do they hate us? Now, the reality was the answers to that question were extremely obvious and clear, especially if you paid any attention to the discourse in the Muslim world over the last 20 years. You would immediately know the answers. And in fact, Osama bin Laden, when he declared war on the United States in his 1998 fatwa, identified the three grievances of al-Qaeda. I mean, he just wrote a document, and you can agree with them or you can disagree with them, but you can go look at it and you can know what their grievances are. He said, number one, the U.S. is constantly intervening in the internal affairs of Muslim countries, and his particular grievance was the U.S. occupation of Saudi Arabia, but there were all kinds of other countries in which we had been intervening and interfering for decades. The second grievance that al-Qaeda cited was that the United States is bringing huge amounts of death to Muslim civilians, and in particular Muslim women and children. He cited the 500,000 deaths that all scholars and historians agree took place as a result of the sanctions regime that the United States imposed in Iraq after the Persian Gulf War. And there was a famous interview, by the way, where Madeleine Albright, the Clinton Secretary of State, was asked by a reporter. They asked her, they said, you know, the sanctions regime, multiple reports now document, that you favored and oversaw killed 500,000 innocent Iraqi civilians because the sanctions impoverished the Iraqi people to the point where huge numbers of them starved to death and died of malnutrition. And they said to her, do you think that's worth it? And without barely pausing for even a moment and changing her expression, she said, yes, I do think that was worth it.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And, you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
And that footage was played over and over and over and over and over and over and over again in the Muslim world. And yet, I would say 99% of Americans are unaware that that took place. And so when you listen to the Muslim discourse, you have an immediate understanding of why they hate us, but it's easy to understand why Americans don't. And then the third grievance that Osama bin Laden cited in his fatwa was that the United States continues to blindly support Israel and enables its aggression against its neighbors, causing huge numbers of deaths in Lebanon and in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. So those were the grievances that al-Qaeda cited. They were basically echoed in the Muslim world, but that's something that Americans never heard, basically. And so they were truly wondering, legitimately and reasonably, why do they hate us? And so the government had to provide an answer to that. And George Bush spoke on September 20th, and he couldn't stand up and say, Americans are asking, why do they hate us? And I'd like to tell you that the reason they hate us is because we've been interfering in their countries for decades, and we've caused the deaths of 500,000 children and women in Iraq, and we continue to support Israel as they slaughter Palestinians and the Lebanese. They couldn't say that answer, the truth, so they had to come up with something else. And the answer, of course, was they hate us for our freedoms. That was the answer.
Americans are asking, why do they hate us? They hate what they see right here in this chamber, a democratically elected government. Their leaders are self-appointed. They hate our freedoms, our freedom of religion, our freedom of speech, our freedom to vote and assemble and disagree with each other.
Now, that answer is so ludicrous and absurd on so many levels that it's hard to actually say it these days without laughing. So I'm not going to spend any time explaining why, but what's so ironic to me and what is so interesting about that answer is that if that were true, if that really were the reason why Islamic radicals hated the United States and wanted to attack it because they hate us for our freedom, then what we've done over the last 10 years constitutes the greatest possible gift that we could give to those terrorists and Islamic radicals, because nobody has waged a more effective war on American freedoms, the things that those Islamic radicals supposedly hate, than the United States and its government has. And I just find that ironic.